Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Middle Class Rockstar. I'm very happy to be speaking into my new microphone for the first time. It's a Shure SM7B. No, they're not sponsoring the podcast, although it sounded like it for a second. I was just interviewing Jacie Sites with my Gauge large diaphragm condenser, and it's a great mic. It's been the primary mic in my crafty little home studio for a long time. But while I was doing the interview, my Shure SM7B landed on the front porch, so I ran out to get it and plug it in. I sound like a nerd. My Shure SM7B showed up on the front porch. But anyway, it's significant because this is a great microphone I've wanted for a while, and I've been saving up Guitar Center gift cards from students from Christmas and things like that. So I've saved up some gift cards over the last few years, and I was just looking in my wallet the other day, and I thought, you know what, I have just about enough to get this microphone. So I did. Here we are. Let me know how it sounds. What's new with me? My band just dropped a new track. It's a Fleetwood Mac cover, Gold Dust Woman in the Chain. We call it Gold Dust Chain. If you haven't heard it, it sounds something like this.
Well, did she make you cry, make you break down, shatter your illusions of love? And is it over now? Do you know how? Pick up the pieces and go home.
And it's out on streaming platforms everywhere. Go check it out. I am now on Patreon as both an artist and podcast host. Patreon is a great way to support your favorite creatives with a small monthly donation so that they can continue to do what they love and give their gift to the community. In exchange, artists offer exclusive perks to their patrons. I, for one, have fully produced songs that are only available on Patreon. I'm also starting to put up explanations on my chord progressions, lyrics, and production style, offer big merchandise discounts, have exclusive intimate live streams, and all kinds of other fun stuff. I've got big plans for my Patreon page, and for less than the price of 1 cup of coffee per month. One last thing before we get on to today's guest. Big news for Middle Class Rockstar. I mentioned it last week as well, and it's directly involving last week's guest, Chris K. As of a couple weeks ago, Middle Class Rockstar has teamed up with Chris K's Colorado Playlist, a weekly show about everything Colorado music. The show gets aired 52 hours per week across 25 unique FM stations statewide. Every week, an 8-minute segment of this podcast will be aired on the Colorado Playlist. I am very excited about this. Chris has been a buddy and mentor of mine since I first started putting out music, and it's absolutely wonderful to be able to work with him on this. If you're unfamiliar with Chris K's Colorado Playlist, head over to coloradoplaylist.com for more info and show listings. Folks, this is big for the podcast, to be reaching some FM wavelengths and expanding a little bit. Chris K has been very generous to allow me to take over his show for 7 to 8 minutes every week. If you haven't heard of Chris K, he's been on Colorado radio since 1977 and has been a major player in the scene for local artists ever since then. Okay, on to today's guest. I had a great conversation just a few minutes ago, actually, with Jacie Sites of the band Whitewater Ramble. They've been a staple here in the Colorado scene for a long, long time, and have done all kinds of things throughout their career. Whitewater Ramble describes themselves as high-octane Rocky Mountain dance grass. Wow. Whitewater Ramble uses a simple recipe to craft its sound. Start with bluegrass instrumentation, add drums, and finish with a boundaryless approach to grassing up everything from disco house grooves to roots to Americana. I don't know how you could read that elevator pitch and not want to listen to them. In 2018, Westward magazine named them one of the 10 best Colorado bluegrass artists alongside the legendary Hot Rise and Leftover Salmon. In 2019, they were the winner of Best Music Video and Most Dramatic Music Video for their song Hollow by LA Music Critic Awards. They've been written about by Relics and Spot Magazine, and they've toured with the likes of Green Sky Bluegrass, the infamous String Dusters, and Railroad Earth. In this episode, we chat about Patrick's upbringing in Idaho, how he moved to Colorado and first discovered the jam scene and bluegrass music and really fell in love with it at the age of 26 after watching David Grisman at the Mishawaka Amphitheatre. We also chat about how he could have gotten into this music much sooner in life had he followed his father's influence. Jacie Sites is a renowned violinist, or fiddleist, excuse me, that's offensive. My apologies. He's a fiddleist. He's a 9-time National Fiddle Champion and Grand Master Fiddle Champion. And his father was playing growing up around the house. He casually mentioned to me how Jerry Douglas came over for a jam session. But Patrick didn't quite catch on to the music right then. It took him a few extra years, but he's all in on it now. Like I said, Whitewater Ramble's been around forever in the scene. And if you're in the Colorado scene at all or in the jam scene, you've heard of them, you've been to a show, they're absolutely phenomenal. And I'm so glad that Patrick sat down with me. We talked about booking agents and growing the band and touring and all kinds of stuff. So whether you're an indie artist or a fan of this music or just a casual listener of the podcast, this is a great episode for you. One of my favorite conversations I've had so far. And at the end of the episode, we'll hear a news track from Whitewater Ramble called Broken Rocks off of their brand new album, Pseudonymous. It came out mid-February, right before the world ended, so they haven't been able to tour on it. But Patrick tells a great story about this song in particular, where he records it by banging a chain against the concrete outside of the recording studio. Hear about that and more right now. Middle Class Rockstar Podcast is brought to you by PQ Mastering. Patrick at PQ Mastering puts the finishing touches on this podcast. For any of your audio or restoration needs, go to www.pqmastering.com. Also, Narrator Music. For simple and affordable licensing for sync, visit narratorrf.com. Patrick Sites, what's happening, my friend?
Hey, not much, man. Not much, like a lot of our musical friends.
Yeah, right. None of us are up to much. It's a pleasure to get to cyber meet you, I guess. We're not in person, obviously, but I feel like our relationship has pretty much exclusively been over Facebook.
Yeah, like with a lot of, musical and other artistic friends, right? A lot of people, you kind of follow their paths and, a lot of the same people and mutual friends. And so, yeah, I've known of you through Ryan Sapp. So, that always bridges between where you feel like you kind of know somebody without very personally knowing them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fun community, and it's nice to be able to, like you're saying, follow people and see what they're up to. And a big part of the reason why I do this is to get to chat with those people, get to know them a little better.
Absolutely. No, it's a great idea. I've actually done a few of these with a few other colleagues as well. So I'm not ambitious enough, I guess, to try to bite into it and host one myself, but I love participating in these things. So they're great, man. Awesome.
Well, so let's go a little bit in chronological order here. Where'd you come from? What was your childhood like, and how'd you first get into music?
Well, I was born in Idaho. And I grew up in a musical house. My father was I don't know how many times over now, but 7 or 8 time national fiddling champion.
No kidding.
Yeah. So he actually learned to play fiddle kind of as an adult, I'd say, probably when he was 18 or 19. And he learned to play fiddle from the same man that Mark O'Connor, the kind of legendary Nashville classical composer, learned to play from. So he was learning the same time. And in fact, he and Mark, my dad's a few years older than Mark, as the older person, I wouldn't say the more responsible person, but he drove Mark as like a 12 and 13 and 14-year-old kid around to a lot of the fiddle contests.
Wow.
So when my dad was like 19 or 20, which is kind of crazy to think, because I don't think he was that responsible back then, like most 20-year-olds, but that was kind of the house that I grew up was an Americana fiddle, bluegrass, old time fiddle. But I completely was anti all of that. I didn't enjoy that style of music. I didn't want anything to do with it. I was listening to hip hop and rap and NWA. And I thought that was just way cooler and something I was into. So I was around it and exposed to, great Americana acoustic music my whole life. And it wasn't actually until later in life I was on unemployment stints. I'd moved from Idaho to Colorado about partway through college, and followed a girl out here, of course, like a lot of guys relocate and move places.
Yeah.
But I came out here and I was actually working for Hewlett Packard doing IT and tech stuff. So I kind of got into that in the late 90s and got to ride the tech boom up a little bit. But I got laid off from HP and given a big severance package. And I had just recently went to Mish and at the Mishawaka Amphitheatre and saw the David Grisman Quintet and was like, wow, that's really cool. I had a lot of friends that were picking around campfires and playing banjos and guitars and mandolins and fiddles, and having just my ear in that. I was like, wait, I know all this stuff. How do I know all this stuff? Because I was just exposed to it. It was like the soundtrack of my childhood. So,
and so to jump back a little bit to your dad, because that's very interesting. First off, what's his name?
Jacie Sites.
Joe. Okay. And is he up online? Does he have music up and stuff like that?
Yeah, he and his wife, they've got somewhere around 180 fiddle students, several of which have also went on to win major fiddling competitions. And so he's kind of now at this point kind of legendary in that competition fiddle scene. He's kind of a big deal in that world. You know, to me, he's just dad, but yeah, he's kind of well known in that circle.
That's amazing. And when you said he picked it up at 18, 19, that absolutely blows me away, because people say that the fiddle or the violin is the most difficult instrument.
Definitely.
The violin followed by the French horn is what I hear.
Oh, ouch.
And to master, and I own a fiddle, right? I took a few lessons a few years ago just for fun, to do something to take my mind off music, I guess. That was a weird hobby to pick up. But anyway, I sound like a dying goose every time I play it. And well, it's such a difficult instrument because you have to hit it right in the right spot for it to be in tune. You don't have a whole fret to be in tune. And it amazes me that he picked it up at 18, 19. It's one of those instruments that's a language. I feel like you have to pick it up when you're 4 or 5 years old, but he picked it up at 18, 19, and then had the discipline not just to play it, but get world-class good at it. I mean, that's crazy.
Well, he's one of the traits I think that I take a little bit away from him is that he's kind of maniacal about things and hobbies, or, any sort of things he got into. Dives in, feet first, and kind of, when I fast forward and think about my own, musical career and being around it my whole life, I picked up the mandolin at 26. So I was definitely an adult, no music training, no anything other than my ears and the things that I had heard around me and been around my whole life. And so same thing, I would just assume the way that my dad dove into it, just face first. And at the time, I would play my mandolin like 20 hours in a day and go to sleep and then wake back up and like do it again for another 20 hours. And I imagine that's the same sort of thing that he was doing back then, just, obsessed with it, right? And it was just a time for, I don't know how he balanced it, because he was still like working a job. I was a kid. He was supporting the family and still, working and still, pursuing this passion of his. So I don't know how he did it. When I picked it up, I was, like I said, I was on unemployment from HP. I had a severance package. I had more money than I had ever had when I was, at that age. I think I was like 24, 25 when I started and kind of getting into it. So I just sat around. I had nothing to do all day. So I was like.
So this was after you came to Colorado and you got and checked out David Grisman. And then that made you say, I'm going to pick up the mandolin.
Yep. That made me want to pick up the mandolin. And I had a lot of friends. We were going to shows. I was kind of getting indoctrinated a little bit into the Grateful Dead culture a little bit. I had friends that were big into Fish and Panic. And I kind of latched on. I loved Leftover Salmon before I really even knew what, that style of music was all about. And I liked another Colorado band called Runaway Truck Ramp. And so it was one weekend at Mishawaka. Probably sometime maybe around 2000, 99, 2000, I saw, it was that same weekend, but Salmon was on Friday, Runaway Truck Ramp was on Saturday, and Sunday was the Grisman Quintet. And I knew all the Grisman Quintet songs in my head because my dad had played those records my whole childhood. And I was so ignorant to the fact of what was going on, but I loved the music. But all three of those bands are fronted by mandolin players.
Yeah.
I can remember calling my dad that next week and saying, "Hey, Dad, I think I want to play the dobro." And he said, "Oh, the dobro, that's cool. You like Jerry Douglas?" And I was like, "I have no idea who that is, Dad, but I just saw this guy named David."
Yeah.
My dad's like, "That's not a dobro." And I wouldn't believe it. And he was like, "Yeah, you could like Google it or something, look it up." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's a mandolin."
Yeah.
So that was how ignorant I really was to it and how oblivious to the things that were, going on. And then, my dad shared a photo with me of, I was probably maybe 5 or 6 years old, and in my living room was Bela Fleck, Jerry Douglas, and Mark O'Connor sitting in my family living room, like having a jam session with my dad.
Oh my God.
And I could care, I could care less.
And you didn't know what a dobro was.
I thought it was a mandolin.
Oh gosh, that's crazy. So you mentioned the dead culture and the jam culture in general. What is it about that culture? It's obviously a very contagious culture for a lot of people. What was contagious about it for you?
I think the community and the fun. Everybody was in such a good mood and hanging out in the parking lot before, and everyone's just drinking and enjoying the substances of their choice and enjoying the Colorado sunshine and outdoor music. And it was just a fun community to kind of just go visit for a weekend, and then kind of go back to your normal life. And yeah, it was just, they had such an appreciation of the music and of the art that they were going to see, and just the way they would, prop up their favorite bands. But everybody was just such a fan of the scene in general. And while people might love Fish more than they like Widespread Panic, there's still an overall understanding that, hey, this is improvisational, fluid jam music that is going to be organic and different every time. And I thought that was always really cool.
So is there a connection between the jam, the fluidity of it, and the fluidity and the jam of the people? That's a weird way to ask the question, but the way you describe people, and I mean, I've been to these shows, the way you describe people hanging out at these concerts, it seems very chill, do what you want, love each other. And does the music to you kind of have that same message?
I definitely think it does. I think that it's kind of, musicness without boundaries, and it without musical boundaries or lyrical boundaries. And songs can be about anything and all over the place and complete gibberish and meaningless, but the music could be amazing and giving you something. And so songs could mean completely different things to completely different people, and just left open to this interpretation. And I always personally had such an appreciation of how, people would interweave songs together and kind of medley their own songs and tease this and jam into this. And I didn't really get it from a musical standpoint. I just thought it was cool.
Yeah.
And I've always been a musical fan, and I've been to, hundreds of concerts throughout my life, large pop artists and, every style of music you can imagine. And I'm like, well, I never saw that at a Nirvana concert. The songs were minutes long. They played the songs more or less kind of how they were. There's maybe a guitar solo added here or there, but it sounded close to the record, right? And all of a sudden, here was a thing where I could go listen to a Grateful Dead studio album, and it sounded nothing like the tapes that you were listening to of the Dead, or same thing with like Panic or Fish, right? Those same sort of bands. So I was like just mind blown by the fact that you could just have such a different experience seeing a band from one show to the next.
That's so cool. And you're in the scene now, you're in your mid-20s, 26 or so, right? And was that when you started playing mandolin, that was your first musical instrument that you took seriously, correct?
Yeah, that was my first instrument. And I bought a $100 mandolin off eBay, which is pretty classic for something around 2000, 2001, somewhere in that time frame. And $100 mandolin. I bought a Chris Steele instructional video that's still too difficult for me to comprehend. Like 13 at the time, I think. So yeah, I just sat down and just started like learning. I bought a little Grisman book and tried to learn those songs, not knowing they were way too hard for me as well at the time. So I didn't take a traditional path of like learning like some scales or learning some really simple like tunes. I just kind of jumped right into some hard stuff because I didn't know any different. I didn't, you know, I was just figuring it out. So between that and the Avogadro's Bluegrass Jam every Wednesday night, I don't think I ever missed that jam. Like I went every week religiously.
Was that intimidating when you'd first gone from listening to music and being a fan and then starting to play at a time where that's a late time to start an instrument for most people, I'd say. Was that intimidating the first few times you went to Avos to do the jam?
Yeah, it's terrifying. I had no idea what I was getting into, and I had no idea the speeds and the tempos in which people could actually play these little songs that I was like learning. And it just so happened, and it took me years to figure this out, kind of after the fact. But at the time, I was going to that Avogadro's jam. I didn't know any different, but there were 3 national bluegrass bands that all had members of those bands that were frequent like people at this jam. So the caliber of the jam was literally world class. And as there were members from, it was the Open Road Bluegrass Band that performed for several presidents and is a staple still to this day on like the XM radio bluegrass channel, Acoustic Junction or whatever. They're always playing open road songs. Those guys were all from Lyons and Fort Collins.
Yeah.
Hit and Run Bluegrass Band was another national touring band that had won the Rocky Grass Band competitions. And additionally, there was another musician named Grant Gordy, who was living in Fort Collins at the time.
Yeah.
Later went on to join the Grisman Quintet. Right. And he lives in New York, and he's you know, he's an unbelievable guitarist. That was like the local jam every week that I went to. I had no idea. And I just thought the bluegrass was the hardest. I mean, this is the hardest thing anyone could ever do. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's blowing my mind. And so it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had some great players there. I remember once in college, I didn't go to the Dazzle Jam very often, but they had a jazz jam and I was doing jazz piano in school. And I went to the jazz jam one night and Grant Gordy was the guest host, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it just so happened, you know, I was 19 and it just so happened that every time I took a solo, it was right after he took one. It was just always go guitar, then piano. And I remember stepping off stage going, you know what? I am, 20 years and thousands of hours worse than the next worst player on this stage right now.
Yeah. I mean, and that's really unfair too, because I mean, he's just like, he is just kind of a force of nature, and the things that he does with a guitar. He's also a tremendous mandolinist too. Right. And when I met Grant, he was playing mandolin. I didn't even know he played guitar, and I was just like blown away. But the overwhelming thing that I would say about that jam and that group of people that I'm friends with today and follow their careers and talk to them all the time, is that they were just so warm and inviting. And like, I didn't come in with some attitude trying to like, look what I learned, or here's what I can do. They were very nice and really tried to include new people into the jam. And without that, I wouldn't have stuck with it. That was a big part of it.
I think that speaks volumes to the scene and goes back to what you were saying earlier about how everybody is cool and does what they do and respects each other. I think that speaks volumes of that music in general.
Yeah, I'd spend all week long working on one, the melody to like Blackberry Blossom or Whiskey Before Breakfast, 2 very common fiddle tunes that turns out are not that easy a fiddle tune, and you probably shouldn't start with them. There's probably 20 tunes you should learn before you get to those 2, right? Yeah. Like trying to just jump right into giant steps or something, right? There's a pattern to build up to, but I practiced all week long so that I could take that one solo, that one break, and then, they would like include me and let me do it and let me play it and like give a little feedback, like, hey, good job. They could see how much I was investing in playing.
Right. So, they wanted to let you take your slam dunk,
Yeah. And then they would throw me under the bus on a few other things throughout the day, just fall apart. The encouragement was really great from that entire scene and that entire crew.
So at what point did you start to feel like, okay, I can jump up at a bluegrass jam where I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know who's playing, but I can jump up and I can hang.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a couple, 2 to 3 years after that, sort of just based down at Avogadro's every week and just playing and practicing on my own nonstop, going to like a bluegrass festival. I think the first time I went to Rocky Grass, camped out, and I camped out, and my kind of campmate right next to me was a guy named Pete Cartsunis,
Yeah.
singer-songwriter, great friend of mine today. But at the time, we were just picking like crazy everywhere and meeting people and learning things. And that was the first time that I kind of figured out that, like, I'm better than I think that I am. I've progressed a lot. And I'm no longer in my Fort Collins jam bubble of these just outstanding musicians. And once I kind of got out away from that a little bit, I started to realize, like, I can play, and I do have an understanding because I kind of got given that school of hard knocks, so to speak.
And what were you doing for an occupation during this time? Certainly those checks ran out at some point and you went back to work. Yeah.
Yep. So I basically was kind of riding the whole .com thing with HP here in Fort Collins. And so I had 4 different stints with HP all during that time. So they were playing the stock market game. The tech bubble was going up and bursting and going up and bursting. So it seemed like I would work for about a year, get laid off with a severance package. And then the second time I got laid off, I came back to work for more money than I was making before, and then an even bigger severance package the second time. So it was a really unusual circumstance to be a young man with a hobby and now all this time on my hands, and I had money to pay my bills. So it was like I was kind of on and off for every year for about this 3 to 4 year period there. So it was very fortunate, and that's what helped kind of, I guess, if you pick up a hobby as an adult, you don't have that much time to invest in, which I was very fortunate where I had nothing but time to invest into it. And when I wanted to buy another mandolin, I had money at my fingertips, but it would run out, and then I would go back to work and then work again for about a year and get laid off. So it was a weird time in my life, but it's what catapulted my music career.
And where were you mentally at that time? Were you thinking, I'm going to ride this wave so I can eventually become a professional musician? Or had that not occurred to you yet?
It honestly hadn't occurred to me yet until I just, ran into a guitarist. I was having a hard time finding a guitarist. I wanted to do things outside of bluegrass, I guess. And I didn't really understand the concepts of improvisation. And I met a guy at another guitarist at just like a house party, and he was playing these Allman Brothers tunes and Dead songs that, like, I knew, and he was just playing them, and he'd be like, play along. And I'm like, how? I don't know. And so, he was kind of a gateway into doing that. And so we played together for the course of a year or two, and then eventually learned enough material and songs, we started doing open mic stuff together. And then that was just for fun and to get a few beers and, and that sort of thing. And then it kind of progressed to the next thing. We're like, hey, why don't we get a couple of people? We added a percussionist and a bass player, and we were playing a handful of original tunes and a couple Grisman tunes, a couple bluegrass tunes. I didn't sing a note. I just played the mandolin, and it was fun. It was a fun hobby. And I think that just the natural progression just kind of kept going where, well, maybe we try to get an even better gig. Maybe we try to get one more thing, it just kind of kept going. And then at one point, the ball got rolling so hard for me where I think I just got totally addicted to the energy of the stage and the next gig and the win of landing a bigger gig or opening for this band. And I can just remember, like, landing opening spots for bands that I adored, like Railroad Earth or Carl Denson's Tiny Universe, and like, just like, hey, we're a little local band around town. Can we open for you? Like, we'll paint all out with flyers just so we can make our $100 to open for you. And their management and booking and people would say, like, sure, sounds great. Like, who's going to turn down free promo, right?
Who was the first one? Who was the first national act you guys got, and how was it billed?
Railroad Earth for sure was the first big thing. We had been just playing around Fort Collins, and I think probably the biggest place we had played, we had done a couple of shows at Avogadro's. We had done a couple of shows. It was Linden's at the time that became Carr O'Neill's, and then went under. But yeah, we just played a couple of like smaller things. coffee shop gigs, all that sort of stuff. I personally loved Railroad Earth. I saw them in like 2000 or 2001 at Telluride Bluegrass Festival. Fell in love with the band. I thought, how cool, fiddles and mandolins, but they had drums, and that's what I liked about Leftover Salmon, but they had all these great songs. And I literally just sent an email. I sent an email to every email address on the Railroad Earth website. I saw they were coming to the Aggie in Fort Collins. And I also copied, at the time, it was Scoo Leary, the guy that owned the Aggie. I copied everybody, and I sent an email and attached a kind of a gypsy jazz sort of Grisman-esque type tune I had written. And we had a fairly decent demo recording of it.
Yeah.
Eldon said, love the band, huge fan. This is what we sound like. I would love to open for you guys. I don't know if you have an opener. We don't want any money at all. Like, this is how naive and how dumb I was trying to like book things. I'm like, we don't want any money at all. We'll hang all your posters and flyers all over town. We have friends. We can help get out to the show. And we just love you guys, and we want to do something to support you.
Yeah.
I didn't think anything about it. The first message I got back was from Tim Carbone, who I later became tremendous friends and ended up producing several of our records.
Yeah.
But was the first person that replied right back and was like, hey, great song. I really like it. Maybe something will work out. But he just, sent a nice little message, and then their manager jumped in. And then I'll never forget the email that I got from Scoo, who said, I don't know who the hell you are or who the hell you think you are. Just reaching out to the bands, asking if you open. But if you suck, you'll never play in this town again. It was one of these like hard-worded.
Oh, man.
Like I totally circumvented the process, right? I should have gone to him, and I don't know, whatever.
But I mean, we've seen that work both ways, right? Sometimes you go straight to the artist and you get the answer you want. The venue gets 50 of those probably.
Yeah. So, I got this really harshly worded thing, but at the end of the day, the Railroad Earth camp said, sure, we'd love to have these guys in the bill. So they paid us $100. We got to meet them all backstage, hang out. They were a bunch of gracious, wonderful guys. Listen to a little bit of our performance. I think I even asked either Tim or Andy Gessling to come up and sit in a song with us that night, which they did. And
they did. Oh, wow.
A recording of it somewhere. I mean, just, that was it. We played a 45-minute set. That was our first time ever, like, setting up on a real stage with a real, monitor engineer and the whole deal. So we were completely fish out of water. We had no idea what we were doing at all.
That was just as a duo?
No, that was a full 5-piece band.
That was the full 5-piece. Okay.
Full 5-piece. We set up our drums. We all crammed together, because the headliners don't want to share their backline with you, right? So we set up our own drums and just crammed up to the front, and just kind of like.
How were you guys billed on that show?
We were Whitewater Ramble.
You were already Whitewater Ramble. Okay.
We were already Whitewater Ramble, and the early formations of the band, I actually I wrote a song sitting off the edge of the stage up at Mishawaka, and I called the song Whitewater Ramble, and we hadn't named kind of our group yet. Like, we just had like 4 of us at the time that were kind of jamming together and playing like stuff around town, really with no name. We were just signing up for open mics, and then it wasn't until I think we changed our name officially to Whitewater Ramble, because I named the song Whitewater Ramble, and somebody said, hey, that's too cool. Like, we should just use that as the group name. So I was like, all right, cool. So that's how we changed it to that. And I think our first show as Whitewater Ramble was with Chris K at Archer's Pool Hall.
Was with Chris K.
Yeah, I'm almost certain of that. I would have to go back and really do a history lesson, but I'm almost certain that was the first time. And that was as a 4-piece. We didn't have fiddle yet, and it was percussion instead of drums. And so we played Archers, and that was our first, the first time Whitewater Ramble as a name and a full band kind of debuted. And so this Railroad Earth thing was fast forward probably 6 months to a year after that.
You got on it pretty quick. Showed some hustle.
I was obsessed with it, man. I really was.
I love it. Hey, and real quick, for regular listeners of this podcast, the episode right before this one is actually with Chris K. Total coincidence. But so nice. Listen to this one, and then you don't do anything after the episode's over. That Chris K. episode will start.
Nice. That's awesome.
Had to plug it.
Very cool.
So what was the progression from there? I mean, it's rare that somebody starts a band and stays in. I mean, it's one thing if it's named after their own name or whatever, because you decide when it breaks up. But to be under a band name, to be collaborating with other people, and to still be that's been your project ever since you formed a project. So there's a lot that's happened with Whitewater Ramble. How did things start to progress after that? When did you guys first start to try to travel and do tours and things like that?
It was honestly not too far after getting, shows like that opening for Railroad Earth. And one of the things that went very well about that show is the time before that, it came through Fort Collins and they played across the street at the Starlight. They didn't have enough of a following yet to play the Aggie, and like 30 people came.
Wow.
And I remember talking to them and meeting them at the time at the merch table and telling them, oh, this town supports music way better. I'm so sorry no one came, and you guys are amazing. They're like, yeah, we'll probably be back, blah, 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 But then when they came back and they played the Aggie, which was like less than a year later, we really hustled for them, man. I mean, we put up posters all over town. We hit the CSU campus more times than, we got into the poster wars where one band throws their posters over the next, and you're wallpapering the pole every day. And we ended up getting like 400 or 500 people came to that show, and they were blown away and so like appreciative. I mean, they were growing and getting bigger as well. That was a natural progression for them. But at the time, that was a bigger crowd than they got in Denver, a bigger crowd than they got in Boulder. And so they really appreciated how much work we did to get the word out about them. And that also caught the ear of Scoo at the Aggie. And at that time, I think it was less than 3 months later, he started offering us opening slots.
Right.
In that same period of time, I think we opened for Michael Franti. We opened for Carl Denson. We opened for Galactic. We opened for we were just getting thrown in front of all these spots. And then he gave us like our own sort of first thing, and they started going very well. And we were able to, sell $5 tickets and pack that place, and 500-600 people would come to the shows at those times. And we weren't very good. I think we had, we were practicing a lot. We were just figuring out how to play as a band, and now people are coming to the shows, and it was, but that's what got the gears grinding for me, of like, hey, let's try to go down to Denver. Let's try to go here. What happens if we drive up to Laramie? What if we go to these mountain towns? So it just became a natural progression where we just started kind of branching out. And then there was just a tipping point where we figured out that we can't just keep playing the same towns over and over again. And we quickly figured that out, that if we were going to be part of the Fort Collins scene, we had to stop playing all of the little shows around. And, so the promoters at the Aggie, they were like, you can't play every corner bar for $100. You need to only play here like once a month. And so we were almost kind of a house band at one point at the Aggie. We either opening for somebody big, or we had our own big show, and we played there a lot. We played there 8 to 10 times in a year.
Seems like that's kind of your guys' home venue. When you guys do a big show in Fort Collins, it's still at the Aggie a lot of times.
Yeah. I mean, it's still hometown for us, and quite honestly, it's been a really funny, transition of the band. There's been times where we had out-of-state venues and markets that we had become bigger in than we were at home. These days, most recent days, probably Denver is probably our biggest and best draw, but Fort Collins is always home. We usually always have great turnouts, great shows. It's kind of a nostalgic sort of thing. And I'm the only person in the band that lives in Fort Collins, and but the beginnings, we were all Fort Collins people, and it's still hometown. It's where we parked the van and trailer. So
then that's your hometown. So when you were mentioning having other markets that were drawing even better than Fort Collins, how did that come to be? Where were those first markets?
Well, the first things that we did is we kind of like mapped out and I was coming from kind of a little bit of a business perspective, a business plan and how to spend money and how to, target certain things. And I was able to ask a lot of other bands kind of how they were doing things and you know, and how, and I'd really watch other bands' tours and where they played. Colorado's incredibly landlocked, right? Any market in any direction is like 9 hours, right? 9 hours to Lawrence, Kansas. It's about 8 to Lincoln, Nebraska.
Right.
Wyoming is kind of, you know, is kind of what it is. But to get to Jackson, where there was a music scene, that's 9 hours. Salt Lake City, 7-8 hours. Albuquerque, 6-7 hours. You know, just so we're kind of in this isolated area. So we started figuring out like where we could go. So we kind of hit that radius, like a 10-hour radius outside of Colorado. And we just started reaching out and calling and saying things like, hey, we opened for these bands. This is our numbers in Fort Collins. Maybe you'd like to see us. And so, you know, we go out there, no rooms, no lodging, no food.
Right.
They pay, you know, $100, $300 if it was a really good gig, right? You know, and that was kind of the deal. So we were sleeping on floors anywhere we could, crashing in the van. Just, you know, we had a group of guys that early version of Ramble was really into it for the fun. They were really into it for the fun, and we were all kind of doing it and growing it together and enjoying it. So
yeah,
that's helpful in getting that. And that formation of the band, that earliest formation, was really all about that. Like we were trying to be out every single Thursday, Friday, Saturday in a different direction. So one weekend would be like Lincoln, Omaha, and maybe like Des Moines, and then home. And then the next weekend would be like Lawrence, Kansas, Kansas City, Columbia, Missouri, home, right? And then we'd go down to Albuquerque, Taos, and Santa Fe, and then home. So that was like every weekend. We just kept doing that. And it took a lot of time, but we had a game plan. We were like, if we're going to come back to those same markets within 6 months. And
how old were you at this point?
I'm probably 30. I'm
Okay.
probably 30, 31, 32, somewhere in that range. And yeah, we were just hitting it hard, I think, in those days. And then plus we were hitting every Colorado mountain town that we could get our you know, places into. And so Colorado was going pretty well and growing pretty well for us. And we put out a record. This is probably 2007 or 8. And I think after we did this for about 2 years, we come back and we put out our first studio album. And that was Tim Carbone. You know, he produced that record, and that kind of really helped us. We had a couple of cool guests. We had one of the guys, Josh Clark, played guitar for Tea Leaf Green, was a jam band in San Francisco. He was a guest on it. We had Steve Mullitz from the dance band Particle. He played keyboard. He also played keyboard at the times with Phil and Friends, Phil Lesh. So we put some names on there. Carbone produced it. We've been touring. We're getting good now. We're getting good at our show and what we do.
Yeah.
And while there's a million better musicians, nobody was better at playing our style than we were at that time. We were
How were you defining your style at that time? What made it different?
I mean, we were just throw down the gauntlet, super fast, stupid bluegrass with drums.
Yeah.
And we had original songs, but we also were taking a lot of crazy cover songs on. And people always got down on those and really enjoyed that. And that was an identity of the band. But we were like taking like the fastest part of Leftover Salmon's repertoire and just, while Salmon's got this major catalog, we were like this and just focused in on stupid, fast, loud, in your face, throw it down bluegrass. And so, you know, we were messing with other styles of songs, but we were making them fast, loud bluegrass, all of them. And that was kind of our deal. And we really liked a band called Cornmeal from Chicago that was doing the same thing. And they were bigger than us. And then we got to do some touring with them and do some other things. And so we'd really focus in on that niche. And I guess what we kind of discovered is that when you play really fast like that, it covers up your insufficient vocals and the need for really great tight harmonies. And,
Sure.
you know, we were very, very immature. Me as a musician, like at that time, most of us in that version of the group were not trained musicians. We were people who picked it up and were playing together because it was fun. But it wasn't until we started getting some trained musicians in the band, as people kind of came and went and had to step aside for, you know, family, jobs, whatever, we started getting some school and educated musicians in the band that were like, hey, whoa.
Yeah.
Thinking, what is that? That's not, no, that doesn't work.
We're not doing that.
So that all kind of culminates around the same time frame.
And now, were there any of these markets that you said you were going out every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and trying to make sure to return within 6 months, if not sooner? Were there any of these markets that, for whatever reason, what you were doing, whether it was what you were doing or the venue you were playing it at, were there any of these markets that you just couldn't seem to build?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there was way more that you couldn't build than that you could. It was hit or miss, but because of the way routing went, and I just, I'll give a prime example. We really kind of took off in Columbia, Missouri for a minute, and it was really exciting and fun. They had a nice little club, could fit between 200 and 300 people called Mojo's. The big theater was right across the street. And within, 2-3 times hitting that town, we caught on with the college there at Mizzou. And there was a line out the door, and we sold 250 tickets. We were blown away. We couldn't believe it. We're like, we're not even doing this at home. Like, this is crazy, right? And then we got a very large slot on the main stage. They have a big outdoor music festival, Blues and Barbecue or something like that. And they'd have like headliners like Taj Mahal.
Wow.
Keb Mo, and we played a set on the main stage like 2 or 3 acts before Fitz and the Tantrums. This is way before Fitz had songs in the radio, but they were a touring band that put on a show and were just fantastic. And we were blown away by that, but we were like couple acts before them. And then we did a late night set in the big theater, and like 600 people piled in. It was all included with their wristband and ticket. And so, half the guys from Fitz were like side stage hanging out with us after the show, and we're just like having a great time. And like 6 months later, they got a huge song on the radio. We're like, holy cow, that's that band.
Wow.
And so we were blowing up in that town. And it was very interesting because we always had to go through, and we're playing Lawrence, Kansas. We're playing Kansas City, and Kansas City is a huge town. So there's more to do. It's tougher to break a bigger town. I felt at the time. We later made a big philosophical change because we were all about college towns at first. And so we had to play big towns to get to it, but we could never get anything going in Lawrence, Kansas. We couldn't get anything going in Kansas City, but we had to drive out there to play Columbia. And then later we started playing St. Louis, and we're doing kind of okay there. But it was an interesting thing. So you'd have to play just a couple of shows. And we opened for some great bands in Lawrence and got some good, opportunities. We opened for Split Lip out there one time, and they were huge. Split Lip Rayfield was huge and from Lawrence. And it just did not catch for us. We were just not that town's kind of band, and we just couldn't catch on. But, 3 hours away over in Columbia, we're packing the house. So, it's just one of those where we just kept at it, and it just would not catch in some places. Other places it did.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's interesting how that happens. And touring those college towns too, I sometimes wonder, there's people that come out and they love the show and like, we love you guys. And I just wonder if they're gonna wake up the next morning and be like, we saw a cool band last night, and then move on, because it's a party town. You're in party town too.
One way to get past that we discovered is we go party with these people. We were still looking for places to stay,
Yeah, of course.
So we would be up till 5, 6 in the morning at these kids' houses, just partying down, playing music all night. Every friend that they had that played a banjo, a fiddle, a mandolin or something, we'd just show up and we'd crash in these people's floors. And then every time we would come back to the town, they'd reach out to us and be like, hey, I'll hang 100 posters on campus if I can get a free ticket. Can I get a poster? So we started getting that kind of, that wave that comes back that really starts to kind of help bands is people like loving the identity of the band. They feel like they kind of know you, they've hung out with you, and that really helped build a scene. But what that also leads to is, and we later had a very dramatic shift, which was hilarious because we started out really trying to get to these college towns, and it went very well, but it's exhausting for a couple of reasons. If you miss a semester, you're old news. You've got to be there every semester. And it's a small window of kids that you get to play to. If you're playing in 21 plus clubs, you're playing to the juniors and seniors, and then they're telling people about you behind you, but they didn't get to go see you, right?
Now, can you hang out with these? Can you hang with these folks on the drinking front till 5 or 6? You're in your early 30s and they're in their early 20s. It's not fair. Were you able to hang with them?
Well, I mean, see, the difference is not only were we able to hang, we became professional partiers, because that's what you do when you're a party game, right? So we're doing this 150, 160 shows a year, right? They're partying, and so we were able to hang and be just fine. It's not the case anymore, but at that period of time, we were really hitting it, and we were really partying. So it was fun, and but you get worn out from it. But we were young enough and having enough fun that the train just kept rolling. But if you did not come back to these towns every 6 months, every semester, like clockwork, you could get lost just like that. They forget about you. Then those kids graduate and they move on, and they go wherever. And the other downfall that we also discovered too is, one, it was really hard. Anytime we jacked ticket prices, like thinking we were really getting somewhere, the attendance would just plummet. The students, they don't have disposable income to just, throw away on a band, that they just saw 6 months ago. Right.
Right.
Right. So, unless you brought some new compelling light show, or you had a new album or something really interesting, it was hard to maintain that momentum in those college towns.
Sure.
So discovered in the long run, you were better off playing the bigger markets, because those were people that live there. They're more permanently there. They have more disposable income. They're not scared of a $15 or a $20 ticket. They'll buy a CD, that type of thing. So it was great to kind of get the momentum started, but the longevity of it, and this was also some coaching and education, working with other bands that we were getting picked up to do some touring dates with, like Railroad, like Green Sky, like the String Dusters. We were doing tours with some of those bands, and we couldn't believe they would just skip the college towns. And a lot of their management and touring people were like, let's go to the bigger market, more money, more tickets, more merch. So different kind of paradigm shift, I guess.
So, and is that what you guys do now as a headliner when you tour? Are you trying to aim for those larger markets?
Yeah, we usually aim for the larger markets. And honestly, our touring, these days, like we tour, it's always to some sort of festival or some sort of thing. We had the days of just picking up a 20-day tour. We don't really do that these days anymore. The grind, it got hard to keep a band together. People have to have other means at home, of whether it's teaching music or, even if you're a musician and that's all you do, it's still hard to be gone 20 days of the month.
Right.
If the revenue's not consistently climbing up with it. Right. So, it's kind of a tricky thing. So in order to keep a semblance of a band together and keep the players committed and happy, we pick and choose. But, there was a period of time, I would say from 2013 to 2015 to 2016, that was probably our biggest, most popular time as a group. It was certainly our best revenue years, and we were exclusively hitting those big markets. That's all we were doing. We had abandoned college towns. We were college town central from like 2009 to probably 2013. And we released our second album, and we did a tour with Railroad. It was all big cities across the Midwest. It was the Milwaukees, the Chicagos, the St. Louis, the Minneapolis. And we saw what that did, and we were like, that's it. No more. Let's quit at the college towns. We can go charge a bigger ticket. And so we shifted, and that's where we stayed. We never really went back to the college towns unless it was an event or a festival or something, was compelling to bring us to the college town.
And now, as you're mentioning, you guys don't go out quite as much anymore. There certainly reaches a point for everybody. It might be at a different spot for everybody, but there reaches a point where you can't just go out and grind anymore. There has to be some sort of a growth, or you have to get to a certain point where you can announce 20 dates and you're coming back and you're feeding your family, then some, no problem. Do you guys feel like there's a certain point where you stopped climbing, and do you feel that you want, I mean, is there still that drive to get bigger? Where are you guys at right now?
Well, that's a good question. I have the drive to try to propel the group and the band name, but I've had to kind of look for different ways to do it. And there was certainly a point, I think it was 2015, we played about 180 dates in the prior 2 years. We released a record. Those were our best festival years. We were on some big festival bills. We were playing larger things, doing some really large tours with other bands, always as a support band. And then we were able to come back and make our own money behind that. And the grind, it became a lot. We had several guys in the band. We just hadn't crossed that threshold. And we had guys that wanted to stay home, get married, start families, or come stay home, get a more stable job, kind of do what was right to make their personal situations right. And we just couldn't do that. We could not do that yet. And we were really close, and we were grinding hard. And I think that year, we probably grossed about $300,000 tour revenue that year.
Wow. Yeah.
But it wasn't enough to keep everybody whole. And as you get bigger and bigger, you start also finding out too, now you got a sound guy, you got a merch person, you got a manager, you got a booking agent, you got, your social media manager. So we had all these pieces that we were adding. And by the time you take all those pieces out of the pie and your tour expenses, some of those years we were touring, gas was $4.50 a gallon. I think we spent like $80,000 or $90,000 on gas one of those years we were touring.
Yeah, right.
So it just wasn't working. And so what we kind of did at that time is our management booking agencies came up with a good plan for us to stay here in Colorado. And we did these residencies where we played cover shows. And we took on a different artist every month or a different theme and just stayed home. And we just 100% came off the road so guys could get real jobs, start families, get married, start having kids and doing things like that. Yeah. And so that changed the whole philosophy. And while it was fun, and initially we came home and we were like, wow, we have 4 shows to play all month. We were playing the same weekend, the first weekend of the month, every month. Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, Frisco, Steamboat, I think was our rotation. And man, the turnouts were great. We were making more money, less tour expenses. Everyone's at home in their own beds most of the night. And we rode that out for about 3 years. And where we still did spot festivals, we still did some summer tour and a few things here and there, but the focus was dramatically different. It was sitting around rehearsing a lot. We'd never rehearsed so much before. So you had to learn all these songs, and you're trying to cover the Police. Let me tell you, that's not easy.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
So we had to cover all these bands, and so it worked out well. But what it did is it just knocked us off of the national map for sure. It knocked us off of the regional map. It was nice to be here at home, but that really settled the band into a much different place. And so the place that we kind of rose out of that was trying to put together a new album, totally different players, totally different sounds, but focusing more on our online personas, and along with that, video, kind of the trying to put out videos. And that's been the biggest focus of the band for me in the last 2 years. We're not doing the touring thing. I don't have a band that's built to tour like that. I have a bunch of professional musicians in the group, but they're all here playing in other projects, teaching a lot. This is where their businesses are. And yeah, we can run out and go do a run of ski town shows. That was our whole spring was a lot of ski town shows and then some summer touring to support our new album. And so everybody likes to run up to Jackson Hole for 3 nights or Sun Valley for 3 nights or Big Sky or, and go play and snowboard and ski. But it's not as intense as we're in the van for 2 weeks and then back another 2 weeks right after that. So.
And yeah, the cover show is actually one of the things I wanted to ask you guys about, because I kept seeing this stuff come up. And, Ryan Sapp drummed in my band for a couple of years and then in yours. So we've kept in on great terms and close contact. And so I would see him post up these things. Like, we're doing this month, we're doing this that month. And I would just look or text him like, oh my God, how did you learn all those Police songs? Or how did you learn all those, if you guys did Petty one month or something like that, maybe. What was that process really like? Did you try to make them your own? And did you notice that you would get Tom Petty fans out to your shows who didn't know who you were, or Police fans out to your shows that didn't know who you were?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was no question of that. And there were some that were gimmies. Anytime you play the Grateful Dead tribute show, you know that people that love the Dead are going to show up and come to it, even if they don't even hardly know your band, right? Like that's kind of a gimme here in Colorado. So we did that for sure, but we also did a lot of other things because it was fun and challenging for us. And so you did see different bands and you did see different people that came out for different shows. Zeppelin brought out a much older demographic than we were used to. That was really cool. The 90s tribute that we did was actually the best selling and most popular one that we did.
Wow.
We did a 90s version 1 and a 90s version 2. And it was, those were really popular. I think that just brought out people from that age and generation that wanted to come out and hear those songs and hear somebody do it. And to answer your question, we would absolutely rip these songs apart inside and out one way or another, but not every song. Some songs we just played it the way the song goes, but with our instrumentation just gave it a certain different feel or vibe. But some songs and some artists are just, the music doesn't lend itself as well. You know, you pick and choose your moments as what to do with it and how to kind of discofy it or danceify it and do things like that. So it was a collaborative effort, and the process was really fun. But after 3 years of doing it, it became exhausting because what happened is while you're rehearsing and learning one artist's material, you're also having a whole secondary set of conversations. And we used to do conference calls. We'd all jump on a conference call and to choose the next month's songs. We'd already laid out the artists. We'd lay that out like 6 months in advance. So we knew the artists that were going to be each month. And then about a month in advance, we'd have to start rehearsing the next month's stuff. So we're always trying to stay 30 days ahead, but we'd have these conversations about, we got to pick 20 to 25 songs. Which ones lend themselves well to us? Everybody listen to them. Everybody kind of digest them. And now let's pick and choose ones we think we can really dial in. And we were rehearsing a couple times a week, 3 and 4 and 5 hour rehearsals. I can remember one with the police. We had like a 6 or 7 hour rehearsal. It was exhausting. We were all about ready to kill each other.
Right.
Difficult, man. And, and while we love that band, it wasn't morphing to us very well. And so we really had to force that one. But oh man, it was so unbelievable learning all of these different styles, different genres, the different ways that different artists like to connect to their art and how they kind of, do things. And you could find repeatable patterns with certain artists. And others were just so all over the map that made it even more fun, right? So,
did you still feel fulfilled musically there when you were doing that? When you were saying, "Okay, we're doing these cover shows," was there any part of you that's like, "Oh, we're selling out and doing covers to bring people," or did you still feel just as fulfilled?
Well, so yeah, so earlier we felt just as fulfilled, and then. It slowly started to kind of erode and chip away at me as my own songwriter. And those years that we were really touring and doing well, we really made a big shift to stop playing cover songs and focus on our original music. And we saw that translate to success.
Yeah.
And, that's what's going to sell more tickets. That's what's going to sell more, land you in larger festivals. Unless you're Dark Star Orchestra or something, on the festival scene, nobody's paying money to go see cover bands in those scenes. They want to see your original art. And we figured that out. So, I'd really gotten into the craft of songwriting and my own voice and what worked for me as a writer, an arranger, and a band leader. That was slowly eroding from the cover shows. And it took a couple of years before that really just totally chipped away at me. And so we started trying to do stuff where we would like play a first set of our own music and then end with like a cover to then bridge into the cover set. And so that was kind of fun and helping that transition a little bit to kind of feed that back in. But then I think overall it just became really difficult to handle as an artist of your own songwriting and songs. To make that transition back. And then to make matters worse, I don't want to say to make matters worse, but we did that for about 3 years and then made a conscious decision. We're done with this.
Yeah.
Well, now we stopped doing those and we started just kind of going back to our normal ski towns, mountain towns, few out-of-state festivals, music in the park events, Brewfest events. But then the phone starts ringing for, hey, will you guys come play your Grateful Dead tribute here? You know, or hey, will you guys come play your 90s show for us? And we're like, oh, it's really what we're not trying to do right now.
Trying to be a tribute band, yeah.
But the money was more. So we had to make decisions on how to do that. And so I can specifically recall bookings with a few festivals where we negotiated playing an original set and then playing our tribute set at some point later in the festival.
Sure.
So that was kind of a compromise that we had to make and kind of had to do. But it was a tough pill to swallow. I was proud of the way, we worked up and released a 18-track Blu-ray from our Zeppelin show at the Aggie and sprung for the big lights and sold out the room. And it was just fantastic. I'm super proud of what we did to that music and with that music.
Yeah.
But I don't want to play it all the time.
Right. Of course. And
people loved it and they call for it all the time. So,
well, and I think that must be tough too, to be given that label after a while, hey, come to your Dead show for us. Like, hey man, we got great tunes,
Right.
But, and you were talking about, a little bit earlier about what you're doing now and kind of trying to develop the online presence and doing videos and putting out original music. And you guys have been doing that. In fact, you put something out on, was it February 14th of this year?
Yeah, that was our new album, Pseudonymous. Yeah.
And it's a funny release date to me because some people felt like the world was going to end and some people didn't at that point, but it wasn't clear. I was still out on the road at that point, and like the next week that was it. And so how did you guys deal with that around your album release? Did you have any idea when you put that out that that was going to happen, or that you guys wouldn't be able to tour at all?
And we had no idea. And you know as well as anything that when you're putting something out, and the interesting thing about that record, it was almost 2 years old in the can. We recorded that 2018, 2019. It was done and in the can. And
there was singles that had been out the year before and the year before that, right?
Yeah, we released some singles as videos and part of a trilogy series and things. And so we're doing some really neat things video wise, but we hadn't released the whole album yet. So how much prep goes into that in the promo, and I've got a publicist hired and we've had our agent working full time, and we've got loaded up March and April dates, and summer's just looking banging, and we got all these things, and we hadn't put out a record in 7 years. And so we were really able to lean on that and call old festivals and call, places like, hey, we got something new that we're really pushing, and also we had those videos that had won some significant awards for us. It was really like propelling our kind of online persona. So when you have this great striking visual material you can lean to, then people are like, wow, we want to book you. And so our summer was looking amazing. And then just like that, right? And so we were like everybody, well, what do we do? And I'm literally still sitting on other videos and other material that we've not yet released, that we would have released more quickly to keep that ball rolling of touring. But now I'm like, wow, I really have to space out the things we're doing and releasing and try to get the miles out of it, so to speak, because we can't go tour. We can't go make the revenue that we would normally make. And so I don't think anybody saw it coming. We certainly didn't. We put it out. We thought it would be kind of funny on a Valentine's Day, of all days. We're like, hey, maybe we'll make some babies and new relationships out of our soundtrack, playing.
Yeah.
So nobody saw that coming at all. And to literally, we're still rescheduling dates that, were supposed to happen in March. We moved it to July, and we moved it to December, and now we're moving them again to next year. And so it's the fallout will be felt for years from this. Sure.
And talk about the album a little bit, Pseudonymous. What was some of the inspirations behind this? And I guess when things do level out, whenever that is, what do you still plan to do with it?
Well, the album for me, it was an interesting transition. I had spent all that time learning so many other artists' music, and it really like broadened and opened my own perspectives and my own writing, is I could kind of take pieces and parts of other artists' sort of work and what I liked or didn't like about, what certain things they were doing, and just take these masters and learning 25 Paul Simon tunes. I mean, that's an education in itself, like just right there alone. And so learning all these things. And so I had been writing and putting new stuff together on my own, just kind of aside from the band and learning those songs. So I was ready to start putting forth music, and we came out of those tribute shows, and I kind of had a different sort of band than I'd had in years past, because now I'd kind of transitioned from the touring musicians then we kind of stayed home in this cover world. And so I had different musicians that weren't really road guys, but they were professional guys like Ryan Sapp. And at the time I had Damon Wood in my band, and he was a guitarist for the James Brown band for almost a decade. These were professional musicians. I had a guy named Andy Reiner. He's still in the band today, but Andy Reiner was a Berklee School of Music graduate in fiddle performance, and just, brilliant musicians that are educated, worldly skilled, have toured, seen lots of things. And this was my current group, my current band that I had. So I really wanted to kind of write stuff that was to some of their strengths and what they were good at, and not necessarily what I was good at, or not necessarily what, how I would have normally done it. So I definitely changed the focus and put more into funk and blues and jazz, different genres. There's still bluegrass underpinnings. It was also a lot less jammy record than our Roots and Groove record, which was kind of a live studio record in a lot of regards. We had 11 and 12 minute long songs that were, one take for the framework of the song. And then of course you'd overlay vocals and do polish other stuff. But the framework of how long is that guitar solo in the middle going to go? We don't know, The next album, I hyper produced that album and really narrowed the focus. It's very schizophrenic. It's all over the place in genres and style. A lot of it was written around social issues that were running through my brain at the time. A lot of the shootings that we were having was some of the themes, kind of some of my own reckonings, going through some personal turmoil, relationships in my life. But that's when you always write the best stuff, right? When you're kind of struggling or just coming out of a struggle. So that record is a lot different. It's a lot more polished. It was my first producing effort, having done 2 albums with Tim. I produced in his style and vein. But one thing that always frustrated me about working in that was that Tim was a working musician with a very busy schedule. And so if I wanted to try something or do something, it was like, all right, you got one chance, get in there and try it. Okay, that didn't work. We're moving on. He had somewhere to be and something to do. So in this case, I was the producer. It was my money. I'm paying it. I'm producing it. I'm doing the whole thing. If I want to take 10,000 takes of this, we're going to take 10,000 takes of this.
Yeah, get it just right.
So that was different, but it was an awesome experience having these incredibly schooled, educated, professional musicians kind of at my fingertips, like a chessboard. And I brought in a lot of guests and did a lot of different things. So it's kind of like my proudest and crowning achievement of not only writing and arranging most of all the songs on the record, but producing it, bringing in the different sounds, bringing in the different things, and also trying to keep it on a semi-decent budget. So,
yeah, sure. And that's neat though, to get to a point where you're producing your own record and calling all the shots. You really have the ability there, right? To to say how close can I get this song to how I'm hearing it in my head.
Yeah, one particular story. She was my girlfriend at the time. She's my wife now, but we went into a hardware store because I was looking for chains. I wanted a very specific chain slapping sound on the floor to start off this song, which ends up starting off the album. And I'm in the hardware store. I was actually in trying to remember which one it was. Might have been an Ace Hardware. And I'm back by their truck chains, and I'm dropping them, and people are looking at me, and someone in the store comes over and asks me if everything's okay.
I'm producing a record. Just stand back.
And so, you know, it was quite an embarrassing moment, I think, for everybody involved. But I was like, you know, I'm very specific about what I'm going for here. And, you know, so then I chose the chains that I wanted and liked, then end up in the studio. It's about 4 a.m. It was middle of January. It's like one of those cold Colorado nights. It's like 10 below, and I'm recording down at Silo Sounds in Denver with Todd Dival's engineering it. And I'm like, hey, I got this chain idea I want to do. And I hadn't told anybody. And so he wheels out like a 150-foot XLR cable. And I'm like, I want to do it in the alley on concrete near a dumpster because I want some reverb.
Oh, my God.
He's looking at me like, dude, what are you talking about? So he wheels a mic out there. He wheels a headphone extender cable. It's like a 100-foot extension out there. And I'm listening to the track out there, and I'm dropping the chains next to the dumpster and recording a dumpster mallet hitting sound and all of these things at like 4 a.m. Drank way too much whiskey. I've already been recording for probably 16 hours that day. And but that was the sound. That was the thing. And nobody was going to tell me otherwise. So,
what song was this on?
This is track one called Broken Rocks. It's really kind of almost 3 songs in one. It's kind of all over the place, but it's kind of a hymn. You think about it like an old time chain gang type of hymn. That's really the beginnings of it, and that's really as you're working on a chain gang sort of theme, so yeah, I'm dropping the rock. I'm dropping that. I'm also like 16 of the voices in the chorus, and then I hired the Black Swan singers to come in and sing a bunch of backup on that as well. And yeah, I was like, no one's going to tell me otherwise. This could turn out like a pile of crap. Okay. But yeah. I'm going to try it. If I don't like it, I'll throw it away. But you know,
I love that. That you had a sound, you said, I'm going to go get it. And now I think everybody that is listening to this podcast is going to press pause and look up Broken Rocks, which is the first track on your new record, Pseudonymous. February 14th, 2020. It's out, folks. They didn't tour on it, and neither did you.
Right.
That's great. One thing, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit now. One thing I wanted to ask you real quick before we part is you're somebody who's your band's had a booking agent, you've had management. What's your philosophy on that? Because I know you've also done these things yourself before too. And even with a booking agent, I imagine a lot of the stuff that gets booked is through your connections that you've made going out firsthand on the road. What's been your experience with management and booking agents with your group?
Well, you know, I mean, there's my history and experience, and then what I would advise people to do.
Yeah,
my
sure.
experience was I did it all myself early on. And made all those connections, and every gig was hustling to talk to whoever was paying the bill to when can we come back? Was it good? Was it bad? You know, and a lot of that networking, it gets exhausting. It takes away from the artistry, right? Of just running the band and doing those things. So, but I recommend that everybody do it for themselves if they can to start, because one, it costs money, right? But two, you have an understanding of the process. You understand that it takes 20 emails and maybe a phone call or two to make that happen, make that connection, to convince somebody. You also understand how important it is what your promo kit looks like. You understand that, you know, you need nice, clean video representation of the band. You need these, you know, nice recorded demos and sounds and songs, and, you know, you need social media presence. You need to be on all the represented platforms. And those are the things that someone that's booking looks at, right?
Right.
So I figured out very early on how important cool promo photos were. So I always invested very heavily in that. Used a guy here in Fort Collins. He's done every promo shot for the band since 2010. A guy named Aaron Morin, and he's got a company called Summit Studios, and he's a Photoshop wizard. He would tell you he's not even a great photographer. He's a Photoshop wizard.
Wow.
And he does all of our album covers. He does all of our work. But that was important. That's a visually striking thing. But it's important to understand all the pieces and parts yourself. And then when you do get to a piece and part, there's going to be a natural transition where you're going to have to transition to a small agent and you're going to be kind of bossing them around and telling them what to do. They're not going to have your connections. They're not going to have your history. You have to sit down with that person and give them your history. If they're a good agent or a good agency, I recommend an agency if you can, unless you just have a friend or someone who has some history in the industry and they just love you and they want to work for you. A lot of big bands, a lot of people find that guy early on. We tried a couple of friends. It didn't quite work out how I wanted to see it work out and how they wanted it to work out. And the band had outgrown what they knew. So getting to an agency where there's a roster of people, your hope is that there's two sides. Yes, I want to take this work off my plate, but two, I want to get gigs that I wouldn't otherwise get, right? Otherwise, I could hire an intern and teach them how to send emails as Patrick Sites at whitewaterramble.com, right?
Name gigs. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're looking to get something more. So a roster of people, whether they're in your genre or not, they're just opportunities they get. In the music world is so wonderful these days that bands will pair up with the oddest, configurations, and that's super cool. So, we were on, for the longest time, we were on a booking agency with a bunch of reggae and world bands. We were the only jammy band and the only bluegrass band. It paid big dividends for us. It was wonderful. We got so many weird gigs and weird, cool things that we would have never gotten otherwise. Just things like that. That's kind of the next progression, I would say, is try to find an agent, even if they're small. Everybody wants a huge agency. Email them all. Try to get conversation. They'll look at it and just, whatever. A bigger agency, they want to see major social media numbers. They want to see Spotify plays. They want to see YouTube plays. They want to see tour dates. Or they just have to absolutely love your music.
And now, do you have a chance with a booking agent if you don't necessarily have those big numbers? A smaller agent, you don't have big Spotify numbers, you don't have tons of Instagram followers, but you're out doing it and maybe they like your music.
Exactly. They got to like your music and they got to like you, right? Yeah. They got to have some faith and trust in you. If they feel like you're going to be here for 6 months and then you're gone, they want to feel that passion and that commitment from you as well. If you can sow those sort of relationships, maybe you've played with other artists on their roster, you've opened for them. There's a lot of different ways to open those avenues. I met a lot of booking agents and booking people and managers and tour managers by landing those opening spots for other bands. And then really networking, not just with the band, that's important, but networking their people. Who was their publicist? Getting on all of those people's radar and things like that. That paid a lot of dividends for me over the years, making those connections. So then you could reach out to that agency and you knew an agent there that you had worked with, or 2 or 3 agents that you had worked with. And so that was a big help in helping me land our first agent. I think we signed on with Crescendo Artists down in Boulder. And at the time they were booking, they had been booking Yonder, who had just left their agency, but they had just picked up Great American Taxi, which was Vince Herman's offshoot project when Leftover Salmon took a break, and Green Sky Bluegrass. Mm-hmm. And we had played shows with Green Sky. We'd played shows with Great American Taxi, got to know their booking people so that when I approached them, we weren't just unknown randoms off the street. They would take a meeting with me. Then I could go sit down with them and talk to them, right? These days, Zoom, right? So
right.
Set your eye on a prize and then work towards it. It's going to take more than just sending an email and hoping they love your music.
Right.
Music, if it really touches home with them, then great, sure. I don't find that happening for tons of people, put in the work and the effort, get to know them on a different relationship. Who are the other artists they work with? Figure out how to get some sort of a date or a tour. That stuff's all obviously hard right now, but these were the stepping stones that I took.
Yeah, sure.
And you move to a larger agency, and then it starts to become tour revenue. How many shows do you play? What was the average tour? What's the average spend? And then you can leverage that when you're trying to talk to your next agency, so forth and so on.
Sure. Well, Patrick, it's been just a pleasure to have you on. Thanks. Did I leave out anything? Is there anything else we need to mention? Anything else you wanted to say?
Hey man, I could do this all day. This is fun. You got time on your hands, and you're craving some social interaction, and especially talking about music, right? So not talking about politics or the pandemic. We're talking about music and the music business, which I love. So this is. I don't feel like we left anything out. This has been great, dude.
Well, thank you. And if you will stay on the line with me for another minute, but I'm going to close off the recording now just by saying thanks for coming on. We had a great conversation, I feel like, and we'll do it again sometime because we'll think of a bunch more things as soon as we get off the Zoom, and that we need to talk about for next time. So thank you so much, brother. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it, man.
Well, that was fun. Great convo. Thanks, Patrick, for coming on. There's going to be links in the show notes where you can listen to Whitewater Ramble, but of course, they're on all streaming platforms, and you can buy CDs and vinyl online and all that good stuff. Also, their new album, Pseudonymous, came out on February 14th of this year, 2020. And we're going to play out this episode by listening to the track that he just mentioned in his story about the chains against the cement. It's called Broken Rocks. I really hope you enjoy it. If you like this podcast, please do me a huge favor and rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts, especially on Apple Music. That's a huge help. You can join the community on Patreon at patreon.com/Andy, SYDOW. And for any questions, comments, concerns, hate mail, or death threats, or just guest suggestions, you can send those to me at middleclassrockstar@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Here's Broken Rocks by Whitewater Ramble.
in the morning.